Timber Talks is brought to you by Wood Solutions. Stay up to date with the latest in timber, the building material that is strong, safe and sustainable. Here is your host, Adam Jones.
Today we have a very special guest, Lisa Tong, who is a structural engineer and design manager for Lendlease and a timber engineering course lecturer at the University of New South Wales. In this episode, we have a really wide-ranging conversation going from what are some of the additional skills that professional structural engineers need to learn to design with timber, to how university curriculums need to change to include new skills such as prefabrication and logistics, and how we can inspire more women to join construction. Now, I learnt a lot speaking to Lisa. I hope you guys learn a lot listening to this conversation. And without any further ado, here is the conversation with Lisa Tong.
Hi everyone, my name is Lisa Tong and I'm a design manager working at Lendlease based in Sydney. I am a specialist in timber engineering and I'm a chartered engineer as such, but I now work managing designs with a user experience team.
All right, I'd like to start with how we both learned at university with the traditional engineering curriculum and how things are changing now and developed to, say, the new paradigm of timber design and construction.
So I think when we went through uni, which was only sort of 5 years ago, we and many universities didn't have timber on the curriculum anymore, and it hasn't been that way for such a long time. When I was working part-time through uni, I was required to design timber houses and residential stud frames. And I didn't even understand the material qualities of timber, which really stands timber apart from steel and concrete. Luckily, the codes are really well designed in Australia, so that makes it quite simple for an undergrad to go through and figure that out. But I was missing that basic knowledge and that basic theory by which to go through it. It was then that when I went and did a thesis in timber that I realised there's this whole other side of timber with engineered timber and all the massive solutions that are coming out of Europe, that this needs to be a new field again. This needs to be something that our students are learning at university. Well, there's timber as a material, and that's very different, but timber is just one tool in a tool belt of all the different materials that we have. I think the bigger change in construction is coming about with the idea of prefabrication, modular construction, all those sorts of buzzwords that are starting to arrive. And there's a whole different style of thinking that affects us as structural engineers, that when we're no longer just designing to code for something that will be built, we're designing for something that needs to be manufactured. It needs to be designed for manufacture and assembly, not just construction. And that's where our role as a structural engineer becomes so much more important than just what's going to stand up. We need to be thinking about logistics, what's happening in the factory, how the guys are putting it together on the site, how it's being disassembled as well. So there's a whole range of things that we as engineers don't typically learn at uni, and we're starting to need to understand and need to learn, especially with materials like timber coming through.
And on this prefabrication process, what skills or how does this process actually work, and then what might the engineer's role be in it, just so I guess to bridge the gap between what they think they need to learn from what they know now?
Well, as engineers, we're always looking for the governing failure mode. What is going to govern us? And typically we're looking at things like strength and serviceability. Sometimes we're looking at durability, and sometimes we're looking at the fire engineering of stuff as well, but typically it's strength and serviceability. That affects our design initially. But once we go to prefab, we need to be thinking about, well, actually, how's that going to run through the factory? What are the manufacturing restraints here? What's going to fit in a container? And if we change to this size, does that mean we're going to save all this money in logistics? Becomes a more whole of life approach to how we look at prefabrication, how we look at design. And that is what we need to start learning and what we need to start changing our mindset. Well, I've always been a big believer that universities teach us how to think. And that's why studying an engineering degree is so valuable. It teaches you how to problem solve. But we typically do, and we start to see a lot of graduates coming out, especially nowadays, that are in one year out the other. They love the theory, but they don't understand the practical side of things. As any engineer would know, you don't understand how a building goes together until you see it actually physically built. And so with a lot of the courses, I think with a practical perspective, and what I try and include in UNSW is a whole range of skills about not only time management or project management of what the work they need to do, but how can we get them thinking beyond just the calculations they follow in the code? What are these implications? How does this actually affect things on site? how will it actually go together, and start thinking about it in a more physical sense rather than a theoretical sense.
If there's one different thing, say, compared to concrete engineering and steel engineering compared to timber engineering, what do you think is the difference in the approach altogether?
Timber engineering it's different from steel and concrete in a few ways. One, we've been doing steel and concrete kind of to death. We've done it quite a lot. It's very, very standard, and the material properties are very well understood. Timber is slightly different, and especially when we start to think about engineered timber, the material properties are very, very different to that of steel and concrete. And that's why it's so hard for us going through uni to not even learn about the material properties of timber and then go design it, because things are not quite the same. And that's why it's so important from a theoretical perspective that we understand how timber behaves versus how concrete or steel behaves. To me, the biggest thing that I see that you can do as an engineer to really do things differently is just question why that's the case. So often, especially when we're designing things that we designed over and over again, we just go ahead because that's what we did before. We need to be thinking differently in that sense of, well, why do we do that? And how could we do that better? If the person is telling, and when you ask that question, if someone tells you, oh, that's just the way we've always done it, then there is your inspiration to go and do something different.
Great. So it seems like to hold a bit of respect for the older people, but then also at the same time not take everything as gospel.
It's not even respect for just the older people. It's respect for the people on site. The respect of people who have done this. They are in and out, and just because we come in and have these great ideas doesn't mean they haven't tried them before. Most of the time, if you've thought of something, someone else has thought of it as well. But the bigger piece is here is if you can take their knowledge and take their lessons and then apply it to your ideas, then you get a well-rounded idea.
Great. One of the other things we're going to touch on today in terms of, say, progression of engineering and in the curriculums and so forth is, say, women in engineering and the buildings industry, because at the moment it's a bit of a boys' club. So I'd like for you to start by telling us a little bit about your experience being such a minority in this industry.
So I don't think we're a minority anymore, which is great. And I was quite lucky going through university as a female. I think we were sort of sitting about the 30% female, 70% male in the civil engineering course. And some engineering courses are even higher than that. If you look at things like biomedical engineering, they're closer to 100% female. Oh, wow. But then again, you look at these things like electrical and they're a hell of a lot more male as well. So there's definitely a balance. And a lot of the universities are really investing in women engineering. Lendlease as well is investing in how can we support STEM subjects in high school students, and also trying to inspire more girls to get into the construction industry. So the biggest thing for me of because I didn't want to be an engineer to begin with. When I was in high school, I wanted to be an architect, and I went and studied architecture before I studied engineering. And even though I was really, really good at physics and maths and chemistry, they were my subjects. And the teachers had said, Lisa, have you thought about being an engineer? I said, no, I don't want to be an engineer. I don't even know what an engineer does. And that was the biggest difference. Not enough people were going out to the schools at my age to say, hey, this is what engineering is. It's really cool. One of my favourite facts is engineers save more lives than doctors. Why don't you want to be an engineer? Why are you a doctor when you can do that? So
yeah, that's great. And what do you think inspired you to get into engineering, say, from an early age? Because by the sounds of it, it does happen a bit earlier than, say, when they finally make the decision to go into university.
The big drivers are definitely people around you. And I've met a lot of really strong female engineers, which have really inspired me. One of the biggest challenges you do come across at a later age is thinking, well, if I want to have kids, how can I set up my career to allow me to do both, have a career and have kids? And engineering is really great like that. But one of my favourite stories is I met an engineer who, female engineer, her partner did something else, was not an engineer, and they had a son. And her son asked one day, can I be an engineer like mummy one day, or is that only a girl's job? Like it's such a such a changing industry in that term. But getting people interested from a young age, but also just giving them that extra option. Engineering uses a lot of problem solving, which is quite strong in the female brain typically as well. So there's a whole reason that we need to get that. But the biggest point of getting, I guess, gender equality in engineering is that we need diversification of thought. Like we talked about before about thinking differently and innovation. If we can encourage diversity of people coming into the business as well, that's only going to increase our chance of innovation.
And as you said, it's something that Lendlease have been looking at quite carefully. What are some of the things companies can do to really try and enable women to thrive in their roles, just so they're not missing out on, say, half the talent that's out there?
That's a difficult one because And as most companies do, there's a lot of those, I guess, gender targets that have been enforced. And while I don't necessarily agree at that, I do see that that's been a big improvement in the industry. I think there's more things that you can do within the company to foster a sort of a gender equal culture. And often that means getting the guys involved. This idea of gender equality is no longer just women's business, it's men's business as well. And it's how can we make sure that we're equal in all parts. One of my favourite things that Lendlease has done to help support women is actually give men parental leave. Because that helps them to understand the differences and the challenges that happen when you do have maternity leave. And it creates a whole different conversation when people start to talk about having time off to have kids. So that even minor changes like that can make a big difference. But ultimately it comes down to fostering and talking to the people within your business and having mentors, whether it's female or male, that support you to consider how life could affect your work and how your career can affect your life.
Fantastic. And I'd like to, as we get toward the end now, what are some of the projects you've been working on at the moment with Lendlease?
So Lendlease and Design Maker are doing a bunch of timber projects at the moment, which is great. And as Lendlease is, I can't really share too many details. What is going to be really exciting is Darramoo House that is coming out next to International House. International House was my first completed timber project. So I'm incredibly proud of that, and I'm so excited to see that next generation come through. One of the biggest things that I think we can learn as we start to do something new is we need to have continual improvement. We need to take the lessons from one building to the next. That's something the design team was able to do really well. They took the lessons from International House and they took them up to 25 King Street in Brisbane. Then they've been able to take those lessons and apply them directly to Darramoo House. So within a few short years and a few large buildings, we've been able to really make some big jumps in the way that we deliver these and the way that we design them too. When we're on site as engineers, we need to be asking the people working, how can we do this differently to make your job easier? Because ultimately with timber, that's one of the biggest benefits is the speed in construction. So as engineers, we need to be designing for that.
So is it like taking the lean kind of principles for construction, but also in the actual design process where you get the learnings?
Lean applies everywhere. Lean applies to how you go and get your coffee in the morning. Like you can lean everything, and it is really important. It's about being lean throughout the process, but also taking the time to learn lessons. There's no point running ahead or storming off when there's stuff to be learnt in the past.
And looking ahead, what do you think the future is of timber?
I think that timber is going to end up being just another building material. I'm excited for the day where we no longer talk about timber being, new and exciting. I feel like timber is going to become another option, another tool in the tool belt for you to choose between when you design a building. So it could be steel, it could be concrete, it could be timber. It's going to depend on what's going to be best, not only for the building, but for the environment, for the client, for the builders. It needs to be what's best for the community. I was brought up by both my grandfathers were carpenters, and my father was always tinkering around, playing with wood. So I've always sort of built up with an appreciation of timber and a love of timber from an aesthetic point of view. And it wasn't until Planet Ark released their study about the sociological effects of timber that really got me. I'm passionate about people, and the effect that timber can have on people is huge. I've seen the effects of how Accenture are loving living in International House and the effects on their people, the study that Planet Ark did, and the results that we've seen out at Jordan Springs in the community centre and how much the community love that timber building. That, to me, is worthwhile, and that's why we should continue working with timber. I think the future of cities is definitely moving towards something that is more of nature and city. Our cities are no longer just going to be CBDs, they're going to be whole live precincts. And Barangaroo is a great example, a precinct of residential and commercial and retail and parkland. And how can we bring that all together? And I think having that within one building, we need to use that same aspect or that same view of how can we bring all those elements together in the building.
And if people want to find out more about you, Lisa Tong, where should they go?
I don't have anything too exciting. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to take a message from a fellow timber lover. And if there's anything I can do to help, let me know.
If you have a question about wood, or if you want to learn more about timber design and construction, then the Wood Solutions Technical Design Guides can help. Right now there is 47 of them, with recently guide number 46, Wood Construction Systems, being released. Now this guide will help you with the preliminary design phase of all your projects. So for engineers, it's things like span to depth ratios and so forth, and all kinds of product information that can really help you in the conceptual design phases of projects. The link to this can be found in the show notes.